Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. My name is Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, alongside Bill Bender, the lead college football writer at sportingnews.com. And, Bill, we are now 34 weeks away from week 0. The countdown is on. Are we getting? Is it too early for the countdown? I like keep doing it. I think I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, you might as well. I'm always a fan of once you get into summer, like I like the day countdown once we get to 100. But
Okay.
there's obviously, as you know, the calendar never stops with college football. There's a lot going on, and always something to talk about, even in the middle of the NFL playoff rush. But yeah, definitely good to be back on.
Speaking of the calendar, that's how we're going to start our show. I'm going to lay out my new plan for the postseason calendar, which I spent a lot of time on, gave it a lot of thought, and I think I have a good solution for the postseason issue that faces college football as they try to shoehorn their playoff around the NFL playoffs, and we'll get into that. We'll get into some news and notes. Bill O'Brien is heading back to the NFL. He's going to go to the New England Patriots. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Deion Sanders getting another 5-star recruit, another 5-star cornerback. He'll have 2 on his roster already at Colorado. And we will get into some more news and notes here and there, Trocchi trivia, and then we'll have the trivia answer. I think I got you this week. We'll see. I don't know.
Cool.
But let's go to the calendar. All right, the postseason calendar. The genesis of this idea in the column I wrote it about 2 weeks ago on sportingnews.com, was that the national championship game for the second time in 3 years was lower rated than the semifinal games, which is an absurd statistic. And I looked up what happens with the Super Bowl and the NFL semifinals and then essentially the NFL final. It's more than doubled every year in terms of TV ratings. Now, Super Bowl is a little different. I'm not saying it's not, but a semifinal should never outdistance a final, and it's happened 2 times in 3 years on the college scene. Some of it has to do with obviously the game was not competitive this year. I acknowledge that. Sometimes it's the matchups and the brands. I acknowledge that, but it's the national championship. It's your number one piece of inventory if you're looking at it as a college football, someone who is in charge of these, the college football playoff and everything like that. So my idea, once we get in 24 and 25, those 2 seasons, there is no flexibility. The championship dates have been set, and they have already announced that the Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium has been booked for January 21st or something like that. But 2026 is a blank slate. All right, 2026, we don't know where the quarterfinals are going to be, where the first round is going to be, when the championship's going to be, where the championship's going to be, what channels the games are going to be on, what networks. It's all a blank slate. And so this is why I brought it up now, with the hope that somehow, some way we can get this thing organized so college football fans and just sports fans in general who don't follow college football closely have a better understanding of when the games are in the postseason, because it's very confusing to people who aren't inside the sport as it is now. I think in 24 and 25, the second and third rounds, the semifinals are going to be held on a Thursday and Friday night in the middle of leading into, I think, either week 18 or the wild card round of the NFL. But the college is not going to challenge the NFL on Saturday and Sunday. And that makes sense. I understand. Right. I don't want to challenge the NFL. Starting in 2026, when we have an opportunity to redo this whole thing and not shoehorn it around the NFL, I want to back it up, Bill. I want to back up the whole season. I want college administrators to take the college football playoff, figure out what's best for the college football playoff, and then work everything around that.
All right.
What I feel like they do is the regular season is the regular season, and then we're trying to work the college football playoff where we can, and the bowls and this and that, and everything takes priority except the CFP. If the CFP was the priority, let's start with that. And I think the day that college football has owned forever and still owns, really, is January 1st.
Mm-hmm.
That's the day I want the national championship game. That's the day I think you can maximize your exposure, maximize everything about it. And so if you agree that January 1st generally gets super ratings for college football, and if it was a national championship game, they would be through the roof. How do you get there? How do you end this 12-team tournament on January 1st? And basically, you need to get 3 rounds of football in before January 1st. So how are you going to do that? Well, I looked at the first 3 Saturdays in December, and I say that that's when you can play your first 3 rounds of the tournament. And if that means that they're not doing bowl games and everybody has to fly here, there, and everywhere, if they're however much is going to be on campus, I mean, that's an open discussion. I think both are viable if you use that calendar of the first 3 Saturdays in December. But to me, the advantages are it's very clear. Everyone understands when the games are. They're on Saturday in December.
Right.
People have conditioned for 3 months that college football is on Saturday in September and October and November. Well, let's just keep going through December. College football stays on Saturday, first Saturday, second Saturday, third Saturday. Now, that gets you done before Christmas. The semifinals are done before Christmas, and now you've got a little bit of a buildup up through January 1st. And then the time in between Christmas and New Year's, you have your media days, you're going to own the sports conversation. Right now, the college football semifinals and the finals, they don't own the conversation. The NFL still owns the conversation. Week 18 and then Black Monday and the playoff setup and the wild card weekend, like the college football is going to be second banana to all of that, where if they try to own the month of December like college basketball owns the month of March, that's the best way to do it.
Right.
So I threw a lot at you, and then we'll get into the regular season in a second. But what are your thoughts on trying to squeeze the 3 rounds in the first 3 Saturdays of December, and then the national championship on January 1st?
Well, that's what every other division does. I mean, that's what they're going to have to do if they want to win. They're never going to beat the NFL after January 1st. You're really never going to beat the NFL after Christmas, honestly, unless you, like you say, go all in on January 1st. I mean, you saw the NFL triple hitter on Christmas and the numbers that Dolphins Packers did. You're just not going to beat the NFL starting in week 18. And you mentioned the semis doing well. Of course they did well. They were good matchups, but they also need to.
And they were also on a Saturday.
Right. Yeah, the championship on a Monday night is a disaster. It's not a disaster. It's just tough because most people, the last 2 years in particular, because the NFL weekend has bounced back, you've gone from an NFL Sunday, week 18, to the championship game Monday. And it's almost like the championship game has been a consolation prize. Also, college football is trying to move from it is a national sport, but it's still regionally based. Like I would, I go off Big Ten. I live in Big Ten country. I'm gonna be honest with you, Bill. None of my friends cared about Georgia TCU. Not one. But they'll sit there and watch 49ers Cowboys.
But they'll watch it on January 1st.
They might. But I mean,
there's nothing else on January 1st.
Better chance of them watching it on January 1st than on a Monday night with TCU and Georgia. And that's the problem with, hopefully the 12-team playoff makes this a national sport once and for all, because that's the difference between the NFL. That's what I always say. Like, you can't, I'll sit and watch, my buddies will watch Chiefs Jaguars. They'll watch Eagles Giants, and they'll watch it all the way through. They're not going to sit and watch Alabama Clemson, because you need to try to make them care by bringing the whole country. And just like SEC fans aren't going to sit there, and they weren't all excited about a Michigan-Ohio State title game, because they probably would have tuned out.
And you were at the media day out in LA this year. That thing got no attention nationally. It was great for the reporters to be able to, get background for their reporting for the game and things like that. But it is is nowhere near the attention that the Super Bowl media day gets, and it should
Right.
be at least a fraction of it. But it's held on a Saturday right before it. Well, there's NFL games going on, and then there's an NFL Sunday the next day, and nothing really comes out of that. I mean, I was at the semifinal media day for the Peach Bowl. That got a little more attention, again, because it was December 29th, 30th, 31st. NFL was not competing at that point. It's, the week between Christmas and New Year's, it's a vacation week for a lot of people. They're off work, and it's traditionally when the
Right.
big bowls are held, and people are used to that. And so I think that would be an important part of it too. I think the ticket demand would be strong because, again, it's a vacation week. People
Right.
travel, and so I think it's just
I,
tough. It's at
I
24 and 25. They're going to have the semifinals on Thursday, Friday, and the championship on Monday. That is just not treating your most important inventory as the number one priority.
and I like that it. One of the things that got brought up a lot about Michigan and Jim Harbaugh and his bowl record is, and this goes back to like the '60s and Bo, is they don't play well after a 5-week layoff. Well, yeah, that makes sense. Like now you don't have that 5-week layoff. Now you're just playing, and maybe that bye week would mean more then, because if you're getting like in the NFL, the home field advantage thing makes sense. So, yeah, I think you've got a good calendar. It makes too much sense, so they're not going to do it. I think pushing the title game back to January 20th and January 19th, which we're going to have in a few years, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to compete with the beast that's the NFL. And I get that they're trying to logistically do it, and I know what the CFP committee's doing, and I hope they make it work. But I mean, I know that from writing experience, like we've talked about it, where I'm like, well, nobody's paying attention to this because these two NFL teams are trying to get a playoff berth, and that's just reality.
So in order to make this work, obviously, the first Saturday in December right now is championship weekend. So this would entail moving championship weekend to Thanksgiving weekend. Okay. And you could still do the same calendar of Friday night Pac-12, Saturday, all the rest of the big ones and things like that. Thanksgiving's a big football weekend. Thursday's still going to be the NFL, obviously, but Friday and Saturday have traditionally been college football days on Thanksgiving weekend. So to hold these big, important championship games, which they are going to be more important with the new format and the automatic bids and things like that, I think actually that may raise the profile of college football over Thanksgiving weekend. Even though you're moving Alabama, Auburn, even though you're moving Michigan, Ohio State to 1 week before on like November, whatever, 20th instead of 27th or whatever the date is, I don't think it takes too much away from those traditional rivalries. It's just a week earlier. And we'll still have the late feel, the late season feel, the importance and things like that. So how are you going to keep moving it back? Well, my idea is to move the start of the regular season back to mid-August and have right now the college football traditionally opens on Labor Day weekend, which is the first Saturday in September. NFL starts the second weekend in September. So college football gets all of the attention on Labor Day weekend. It's great for college football. They usually have some great matchups. We spread it out over Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. College football does, gets all the attention. Like I said, the NFL is just wrapping up its preseason, and that's the only weekend of the year, except for really January 1st, that college football has the stage to itself. What if we tacked on 2 weeks prior to that, and we start the college football season in the third week of August, right? And so you have 3 weekends to yourself. You got the third Saturday in August, the fourth Saturday in August, and Labor Day weekend, all to yourself after a summer of people starving for college football or football in general. I think that would do wonders for the sport. What's your objection to that? What issues do you see here in that type of shift from moving the calendar back in order to hit
All
that
right.
December thing?
The coaches won't like it because they like that fall camp to prep. They'll complain that it's earlier and earlier. My solution's always been you could lop off one regular season game, which they won't do, and because of the money and the TV, or you could lop off the conference championship games, which they won't do. So if you're good, that eventually you're right, they probably will push the season back when they figure out that this model that they have isn't going to work. Thanksgiving weekend's going to be a tough sell because they do like marrying that to rivalry week, and it still did well going up against the World Cup this year. So, I think, and they did. Yeah. I mean, that was subtle, right?
We remember that.
Some sporting news staffers might know what I'm talking about there, but, yeah, so I think that bumping up the calendar does make sense. Do I think they'll do it? Probably not. They do like owning Labor Day because it's the 1 week that they own before the NFL takes over. And
right, I'm just thinking more of a good thing.
Reminder that the NFL is just taking over the entire calendar too. I mean, they've taken Christmas from the NBA. They're like the Grinch, dude. They'll take all of it and that's the thing. You can plan all this. But then the NFL will probably find a way. I mean, they started playing on Saturdays late in the season. So I've always said the college football and the NFL should work together, but don't count on that.
Yeah, so there is a law, actually, that the NFL cannot have Saturday games until the college football season is over. There is actual legislature back in the 60s or so. That's why they have not taken over Saturdays until December rolls around or whatever. So, yeah, the initial rumblings that I have heard is that in 2026 they are going to make week 0 week 1 for everybody. Okay,
that makes sense.
And they are going to try to have the semifinals on January 1st. And they're going to have the final in January 9th or 10th or whatever. So it's still too close to the NFL. I don't like it. It's the semifinals are still going to outrate the final, or potentially, because they're going to find out that January 1st is the best day for college football.
Right.
And yeah, hearing that a doubleheader on January 1st sounds great, but it's going to take away from your championship game. So that is the two, and you're still going to have that long layoff and everything like that. But that, I heard Stuart Mandel talking about it on his podcast, that he has heard at least for 26, when they have a chance to move it, they're going to try to have 2 rounds in December, semifinals on January 1st, and then the championship game 10 days later or whatever, wherever the NFL isn't already
right
already scheduled. So anyway, that's my discussion. I'm passionate about it. I hope some version of it comes to fruition at some point, but I'm going to keep banging that drum for a long time. All right, you ready for some Trocchi trivia?
Sure.
Jalen Hurts won a playoff game for the Eagles. It sparked a little discussion on Twitter that it was the first Alabama quarterback to win an NFL playoff game since Richard Todd back in the day with the Jets in the 1980s. And then there was a discussion whether or not he was an Oklahoma quarterback, whether he was an Alabama quarterback, et cetera, et cetera. You and I talked about, when's the last time an Ohio State quarterback won an NFL playoff game? And you told me it was Mike Tomczak. My question for you, my Trocchi trivia question, who's the last Notre Dame quarterback to win an NFL playoff game? Answer to come. The last Notre Dame quarterback to win an NFL playoff game. Mull that one over while we go through some news and notes around the country. So today it came out that Bill O'Brien back to the Patriots. He is leaving Alabama after 2 years, and he did a good job with the Crimson Tide coming over from the Houston Texans. He for his first year as offensive coordinator, Alabama was number 6 in the nation with 39.9 points per game, and number 6 in points per game, 16 in yards per play. And then this year they were 4th in the nation in scoring and 8th in yards per play. So 2 great seasons for Bill O'Brien. He's ready to move on, and he is going to coach Mac Jones. He did not coach Mac Jones at Alabama. Mac Jones was there in 2020 O'Brien came in 2021. They briefly crossed paths as Jones was preparing for the NFL draft, and Bill O'Brien, was hired in January or whatever. So, but they have not. He's not coached him like during the season. So that'll be interesting to track on the NFL side. That leaves Alabama now, and Nick Saban needs to replace two coordinators, of course, because defensive coordinator Pete Golding is off to Ole Miss. So, Bill, where does this leave Alabama and Nick Saban heading into the offseason?
I mean, he's nailed most of the offensive coordinator hires. This is obviously there's going to be pressure. I remember we were talking about this before we came on, that the last time they really felt pressure to nail these was after they lost to Clemson the second time. I remember talking to the late Cecil Hurd about this, and he said, that's the pressure point. The dynasty's not over, but there's some small cracks. And then Nick Saban changed some things, made some great hires. Steve Sarkisian was his best offensive coordinator hire because it really straightened out some things. And Lane did a good job. But, Bill O'Brien was quality. I wouldn't say great. I would just say he did a good job. So that, the rumors now are anywhere from Kingsbury to Levy. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on this group of coordinators because, like I've been telling people, that drought could reach a grand total of 3 years, and they've never gone 3 years without a national title with Nick Saban. So whoever steps in, I think this is the toughest coordinator position in college football. It's because you're immediately known, and you're only known if Alabama loses. Nobody's like, man, Sarkisian was awesome. And I've never heard anybody say that. But he actually was.
He definitely was. I mean, that 2020 offense was incredible. He had a lot to work with, and you've got a lot to work with, and there are high expectations. And like you said, Bill O'Brien, they were top 10 in the nation in scoring 2 years in a row. You should be able to win at Alabama like that, and they have won, of course, but they are still looking for for another national championship. Any chance he looks internally for either of these? Jim Leonard is another name I've kind of seen bouncing around for the defensive side. But you see any guys on the staff maybe that he would elevate? Traditionally, he doesn't elevate, although he has. Loxley, right, was elevated internally. So anyone on staff that grabs your attention?
No, I think they're going outside,
go outside
for this one. And a couple of the NFL candidates. I think one name, I was reading a list of offense coordinator candidates. One name that caught my attention was I could see him going for Jason Garrett. I mean, Garrett's name was getting tossed around a little bit because he likes those guys with a little bit of an NFL background. Or does he go the Kingsbury route and just that's the way college football is? Levy's another excellent choice. The defensive one's more important, I think. Whoever gets that offense coordinator, they'll make it work. The defensive one, that was the problem last year, was the secondary and the holding penalties and the uncharacteristic amount of penalties. So whoever they bring in as their next defensive coordinator, I think that's the more important of the two, at least in this case.
And the one thing I would say is neither of these are catching him off guard. I mean, I think he kind of shuffled Golding out the door. So he kind of knew that the defensive side was going to open up. And I think Bill O'Brien has made no secret that he was ready to move on as well. And Patriots have been a mess. And that was a logical place for him to land. They didn't have an offensive coordinator lined up all season. And you could tell. So one thing, like I said, I don't think that neither of these are catching Nick Saban off guard. And we'll just kind of see where that goes from there. More news and notes. Deion Sanders back in the news. He signed the number 12 rated recruit, the number 1 cornerback in the country, Cormani McClain, former Miami commit. He's from Florida. He was supposed to sign with Miami, then he just didn't sign with them. It was a surprise. During the early signing period, he kind of let it play out. Last week, he committed to Colorado. So he will sign in the February signing period. And now it's 2 years in a row. Deion has signed the number 1 cornerback in the country. If you're a Colorado fan, that couldn't play out any better, could it?
No, and I looked this up last night that the last time a top. Okay, so I'm gonna start this at the top. As you know, I'm a Packers fan, and when guys draft corners, I'm like, if he's not an SEC guy, I don't care. Like I want, like when they drafted Eric Stokes, I was like Georgia check. Like there's something about SEC corners that's what I want. That's what I want when as an NFL fan. So I looked, and the last time the top corner in the country didn't go to an SEC school before Deion was 2017 when Ohio State got Jeffrey Okudah. It may have been 18 actually, but point being, yeah, no, 17. Okudah went to Ohio State. Very good corner. To get two in a row and to have them go to Colorado is, well, Jackson State, then Colorado. It's pretty amazing. And again, it just goes to show that Deion, best corner I've ever seen in my life. Like cover corner, there's not a better one. And I think that's what attracts the recruits. And it may not attract the 17-year-old kid, but his dad knows. Everybody knows how good Deion was. I got down in a wormhole looking at his stats. He had 9 pick sixes and 9 punt returns in the NFL. Not 3 pick sixes, 3 punt returns in college. He's one of the most exciting football players ever, and he obviously knows how to teach that position. So, and then flipping McClain from Miami, nobody thought that he was not going to play in the state of Florida. I think that's the biggest coup of all.
Yeah, he flipped Travis Hunter from Florida State, and now he's flipped a guy from Miami. It's just going to make the Pac-12, which is my my favorite conference that I guess isn't the SEC, even more fun. Just every program there. Arizona State, I was talking to you earlier about Arizona State. They have like 25 transfers coming in. They have a full recruiting class. They have a 30-something-year-old first-time coach. They're going to be fascinating to watch. And they're like
Right.
8th on the pecking order in Pac-12. Interesting schools to track and stuff. So, yeah, so keep an eye on Colorado, supposedly. Colorado's in the Jaden Rashada sweepstakes. Who knows how that goes? Florida released Jaden Rashada, the quarterback, of course, from his NLI after his NIL deal fell through. He was, reportedly promised $13 million over 4 years and different incentives and this and that, and the offer was rescinded. Rashada is now looking around. He's out of his national letter of intent, even though he signed it in the early signing period. He took a visit to Arizona State, as we just mentioned, last weekend. He's planning a visit to TCU this weekend. And I think, like I said, Colorado is going to be in the mix on that one, too. And then, so one part of it is the Rashada situation. The other part is Florida. Now they're left with Wisconsin transfer Graham Mertz and Jack Miller right now as their 2 quarterbacks. You got any thoughts either on Rashada or where Florida picks up the pieces from here?
Yeah, let's start with the Rashada part. I looked up Kenny Pickett's contract, 4 years, $14 million in the NFL, and a guy that hasn't thrown a pass. This is the pressure point for me, though, is like, at what point are we correcting the market? Like a high school quarterback, I'm sorry, he's not worth what Kenny Pickett is to the Steelers. That would be like me getting more money at the student newspaper at Ohio University than I did my first 2 jobs. That would be absurd. And I know that's a poor comparison because you're dealing with professional athletes here, but it's not. Why would you pay a quarterback that hasn't thrown a pass $13 million? I think it's absurd. So now the Florida end of it's interesting because maybe that's because they're desperate to get the quarterback play where they're at. If you look at their last 2 seasons, their quarterbacks have combined for 44 touchdowns and 27 picks. Kyle Trask in 2020 had 43 touchdowns and 8 picks. So you do need the elite quarterback there. They Anthony Richardson had ups and downs. There was a week there where we thought he was a first-round pick. I'm not seeing it because of the inconsistency in the passing game. So I don't know. I don't know where the soap opera with Rashada goes, Bill. But my sticking point is, man, when you look at a quarterback that could be making more money than the first quarterback taken in the NFL draft, I just think that's a problem.
And how much do you hold Billy Napier accountable? Because, of course, quote unquote, the coaches don't have anything to do with the collectives, and the collectives don't have anything to do with the athletic department. We all know that's not true. They are working together. They are talking to each other. Does he need to get a better handle on his collectives?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't. Again, this is this gray area because I when I get asked about NIL and where it's going, I always say, you hope the market corrects itself, and it's such a cliched line at this point because I know in my head, for the market to correct itself, you have to take away boosters and emotional fans and people that do irrational things in college football. It's not like the NFL where they fixed the rookie salary stuff. They fixed, they go in, they fix things because it's a professional business. So, yeah, you tell me when there's not going to be an irrational college booster out there trying to make his program better, and that will never happen. So this is how these. Let me add on that: an irrational booster in the state of Florida. Good luck.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things where, yeah, Billy Napier and some of the coaches, I think that needs to be part of the equation because this has become a black eye for Florida.
Right. And a black eye for the sport, and a black eye on that kid too. It's going to be
Right.
tough for him to shake this story that is going to trail him wherever he ends up.
Do you think he'll make $14 million in the NFL? And that's the pressure point now, is like you have to be good enough to be a first round pick. And again, not to get too sidetracked on this, but I remember when they were talking about CJ Stroud and Ohio State might get enough in a collective. No, he's going to the NFL, dude. He's the top 5 pick. And that's the right decision. So, when the quarterbacks in college start making more than the quarterbacks in the NFL, it's not good for the sport.
No. Two other things just want to touch on real quick that happened since our last podcast. Georgia wide receiver Rodarius Thomas was arrested on a felony charge of false imprisonment and misdemeanor battery family violence. He was Mississippi State's leading receiver last year, just transferred to Georgia over the semester break, so he has not been with the program long, but that is one to keep an eye on. He is expected, along with the Missouri wide receiver, to be one of their more productive guys. So we'll kind of just see where that goes in the coming weeks. And then, of course, Michigan ended up firing co-offensive coordinator Matt Weiss. He was under investigation, accused of computer access crimes, which is rather vague. But they were committed at Schembechler Hall from December 21 to 23, which lines up with the early signing period. Do not know how those two things relate. They have to be related in some form or fashion. Nothing has quite come out on that. Presumably, Sharon Moore will not have a co-coordinator. Do you have any news and notes on Michigan?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, I don't know that right now that they're going to look for another offensive coordinator. I know Brian Greasy's name was being tossed around as a potential with the work that he's done with the 49ers. I think it'd be interesting to see what the details are on Weiss and where that story goes. But I would count on Sharon Moore being the offensive coordinator. And they should be in good hands. There were a lot of talk when Harbaugh was looking at the NFL that Moore might just slide in as head coach. And I think he's on his way to being a head coach. So as bizarre as this story is, I think, I just still look at the talent coming back on that roster. They're going to be fine.
Yeah, I agree. One topic you wanted to touch on this week, right? The Ohio State wide receiver. There was a tweet with a photo of Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Olave, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Garrett Wilson, all sitting on the bench in Ohio State uniforms, asking, is this the greatest wide receiver, a collection of college wide receivers at one time? And you have an answer, and it's not Ohio State.
No, I mean, Alabama's going to counter with Ruggs and Smith and Waddle and Judy and that loaded one. And then LSU is going to say, well, I think I'll qualify it with this. The best 1-2 receiver punch in recent history is Jamar Chase and Jefferson. That's not close. Those guys, and they got Burrow on top of it, where I was like, a couple years ago, we were watching 3 potential NFL Hall of Famers. So that's the winner of the 1-2. Now, if we're going whole room, I always default to this story, and I apologize if I've already told it on this podcast. I played against a guy in high school that played at Rutgers and back in the Big East days, and he described it. He played safety, and he described it to me as this. He said, in one of my first games in college, Miami was in a trip set with Reggie Wayne and Santana Moss and Andre Johnson. So, and if you look on so that year, Andre Johnson didn't have a huge year that year. Those three guys have combined for Reggie Wayne had 82. These guys were all 10,000-yard receivers in the NFL.
In the NFL.
Not in college, in the NFL. So don't come at me with Ohio State, great receiver room. Gotcha. Alabama, wonderful. Get back with me in a decade when you say we have three guys that went for 10,000 yards and 152 plus 66 touchdowns. And on top of that, Jeremy Shockey's the tight end.
All right.
So, yeah, that's the room. And on top of that, when they weren't throwing the ball, they were handing off to Clinton Portis and Willis McGahee and Frank Gore. So don't, when people tweet these things, and this is history that's happened in the late 8 years, just go all the way back to 2000, as ancient history as that is. And that's the best receiver room I've ever seen. And they even had Darryl Jones and Andre King, who were little-known guys. They were seventh-round picks. Another one I wanted to mention, too, not as good, but maybe fun and maybe faster, was Florida State at one time had Peter Warrick, Ron Dugans, Lavernius Coles, who's one of the fastest players in NFL history, Snoop Minnis, and Anquan Bolden.
Oh, man.
So I was like, and Peter Warrick was the best player in college football that year. That maybe, unless Michael Vick was. But those two stand out. Taking nothing away from Ohio State. But in 10 years, if we're like Harrison and Olave and Jigba and Wilson are all 10,000-yard receivers, I'll take it back. But that's the best receiver room I've ever seen.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, they've got the potential for sure. And, of course, Jalen Waddle's off to a great start in the NFL. Devontae Smith, he's still playing with the Eagles, doing great. So we'll see what those guys can do too. All right, Bill, trivia answer. Who is the last Notre Dame quarterback to win an NFL playoff game?
I mean, I only have two answers. So I think Joe Montana is the answer. Because
Joe Montana is not the answer.
Then if it's not, it's the only other guess I would have would be Steve Beuerlein.
Steve Beuerlein is correct. Steve Beuerlein won a playoff game in 1991. So he won a
playoff game as a starter.
He was replacing an injured Troy Aikman with the Dallas Cowboys, and they beat the Bears. And then they lost the next week to the Detroit Lions, which is Detroit's only playoff win ever.
He was on the Panthers, but I don't know that he started when he was on their team when they won a playoff game, but he didn't start. I think Kerry Collins did. So Steve Beuerlein, if you've got to go back that far,
incredible,
that's a drought.
That is a drought, and he only won one. So so the answer to the question of the last Notre Dame quarterback to win more than one playoff game, of course, is Joe Montana. So,
well, I think, are we sure that Beuerlein, what year? Yeah, that's got to be right, because Montana was close, because that's where I got confused. Is Montana won some playoff games with the Chiefs, but that must have been the season before Beuerlein won with the Cowboys. I knew those two that it could be, though.
Right. So, all right, that should do it. This is my final podcast in this little studio here. I'm moving Friday to a house just up the road. Still going to be here in Atlanta, but I won't be in a basement. I won't be freezing anymore, I don't think, during these podcasts. So
you don't know what freezing is. You don't know what a cold basement is. Try to be in a cool basement in Ohio.
We will rejoin you next week. I should be in a new setting. I'll set up my little podcast studio, and we will talk some more college football. So thank you again, everybody, for listening this week, and we will see you next week on the CFB Nation All-America podcast.